Otis about having made Henry pick his nose once, Vicus explained that a drudge is the easiest person for a vampire to control. After he stopped laughing, of course. His telepathy was coming along fabulously as well. He and Otis engaged in long conversations at night near the hearth, where Otis recounted tales of Vlad's father. Vlad was learning so much about a man that he really didn't know. Vlad was learning so much about a man that he really hadn't known that well, and through those stories, he was learning more about Otis as well. Cringing at the cold floor, Vlad stood and dressed quickly. You'd think that after a week in one of the coldest places on Earth, he'd adjust, but apparently not. He shivered once and reached for his hoodie. He opened the door to the main room, and Tristan met him with a goblet of blood wine. Vlad nodded his thanks and sighed into the cup. He was really tired of spiced blood. What he really wanted was a nice warm mug of O positive and a side of fresh chocolate chip cookies. Otis stood by the front door, brushing snow from his coat. We should leave soon, Vlad. A storm is blowing in, and Vicus said that if it gets to us before we make it down the mountain, we'll have a long winter season in Siberia ahead of us. Vlad yawned. Can I finish my breakfast first? Otis nodded. Vlad looked at the fireplace. The logs had grown cold. The room was empty, except for him, Otis, and Tristan. After a silent moment, Otis cleared his throat. Most of them had gone to bed. Vicus is out running with the wolves. He'd said he'd be back in time to see us off. Vlad drained his goblet and sat on the nearby table. He's running with the wolves. Otis waved his hand in the air, as if it were obvious what Vicus was up to. One of the intricacies of anamorphing is spending so much time with an animal that you understand their desires, their thought processes. Then he smirked and handed Vlad his coat. Besides, he likes to chase foxes. Vlad slipped his coat on, zipped it, and stomped into his boots. Anamorphing. That was something the book hadn't mentioned. In fact, the book had only really covered history and laws, leaving out all the cool stuff, as if any vampire should be aware of those things automatically. Of course, Vlad mused. He wasn't just any vampire. Just outside the door, Vicus greeted them breathlessly. His eyes sparkled sadly at Otis. Too bad about that storm. It's been an eternity since I saw you last. Otis pursed his lips. I can't stay, but I do hope you'll at least reconsider my request. We are old friends, Vicus. If I can't count on you, who can I count on? Vicus held Otis's gaze, then nodded and patted him roughly on the shoulder. He turned to Vlad. You are one of my finest students. Keep practicing and stay with your studies. Be safe. Melanyanki Dievo. We will meet again someday. I am sure of it. Otis stepped onto the sled. Vlad watched Vicus walk away into the blowing snow. I've decided I like that nickname. Otis cleared his throat and pulled goggles down over his eyes, but it was too late. Vlad had already spotted his tears. It suits you. Vicus's pet name for Thomas was Dievo. Devil. So, I suppose it's his way of saying that you're a smaller version of your father. Vlad took a seat on the sled, but he didn't pull the blanket up to his nose. The wind was blowing all around. The temperature dropped to a chill rivaling last night's. The temperature dropped to a chill last night, but Vlad was warm with the memory of his father and the fact that a Russian stranger had seen Thomas within him. The sled raced down the mountain, past trees, wildlife, and snow. By the time they turned the dogs over to Dmitri, took a cab to the airport, and boarded the plane, Vlad was exhausted, and Otis was tense, the relaxation of being in Elysia washing away from him with every passing moment. Vlad flashed him a smile. Otis's entire body went rigid with tension. Did he? Despite Otis's tone, it wasn't a question. Vlad unbuckled and turned to face his uncle. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, me, some evil conqueror. I don't think so. But I was wondering. Well, Vlad fidgeted. He wanted to know what Otis thought, but at the same time, he didn't out it. He didn't. At the same time. But at the same time, he didn't. Otis met his eyes. You're wondering if I think you're the Bravis. Vlad nodded and held Otis's gaze. Otis shook his head, his expression gravely serious. No, I do not believe you are the Bravis, Vladimir. You have too much of your father in you, and Thomas was a good man. Vlad searched his uncle's eyes and found nothing but truth within them. The question is, do you think you're the Bravis? Otis's voice was calm and questioning inside Vlad's mind. Vlad took a moment to mull over his opinion and then spoke to Otis with his thoughts. No, I don't. But if I was, would it matter? A pretty flight attendant leaned over Vlad and handed Otis a cup of coffee. Otis smiled at her and took a polite sip. Of course not. Besides, it's just a silly superstition. Vlad tried to meet Otis's eyes, but Otis focused on his coffee, and the conversation was over. After hours of planes, baggage, crowds rushing, and Otis losing his keys, they were finally in Otis's hunk of junk car and barreling toward Bathory. At last, Otis turned the wheel and pulled into Nellie's driveway. He met Vlad's eyes with a smile. Happy to be home. Kind of tired, hungry, more than anything. Otis opened his car door and stepped out. Vlad followed. He was about to ask Otis if he planned on sticking around for a few days when he noticed a flash of pink out of the corner of his eye. Meredith was walking up the driveway with his jacket draped over her arm. She smiled brightly and said, "Hi, Vlad." "Oh, hello, Mr. Otis." Otis removed the heavier suitcase from the trunk and smiled. "Hello, Meredith. How are you doing?" Meredith shrugged. "Can't complain. Missed having you as a teacher, though." Vlad's cheek grew very warm at the memory of Meredith's kiss. When he thought about how he blurted out that he liked her and how warm her lips had been in the freezing cold, he couldn't speak. His heart had returned to his throat, intent on choking him into silence. "I assure you, there are better teachers than I at Bathory High." To Vlad, Otis looked like a lifeguard to a drowning man as Otis took Vlad's coat from Meredith's outstretched hand. "Thank you so much for returning Vladimir's jacket. I imagine he appreciates it greatly." Vlad managed to nod. His entire face felt like it had been engulfed in flames. Meredith and Otis exchanged pleasantries before Meredith turned and walked away. After she did, Otis handed Vlad the jacket with a smirk. "Charm, Vladimir, requires a voice." Nellie stepped out onto the porch, wrapped snugly in her coat. "I was wondering when you boys would get here. Staying for dinner, Otis." Otis handed Vlad one of the bags and smiled warmly up at Nellie. All traces of tension vanished. "I wouldn't dream of missing it, Nellie." With a blush, Nellie went back inside. Vlad shook his head and rolled his eyes, but he couldn't help but smile. "You like her, don't you, Otis?" Otis looked jarred for a moment. He kept his attention on the front door, as if weighing how much he should reveal to Vlad. It was a pitiful sight, as Vlad already knew the answer. Otis sighed and ran a hand through his hair in defeat. "Yes." Vlad lugged a bag toward the porch, still smiling. He cast a hopeful glance over his shoulder at Otis. "So does that mean you'll be around more?" Otis had the bag he was carrying on the porch and offered Vlad a somber look. "No, it does not." Vlad's smile slipped in disappointment. "A romance with Nellie is forbidden for me. You know that. It's unfortunate." He glanced up at the house and back to Vlad. "But unavoidable. Besides, Alicia has enough reasons to place a price on my head." to say that I have bled for your well-being, Vladimir, and I will gladly do so again. Vlad nodded, his curiosity satisfied for the moment. Will we ever be able to be together, like a family? Perhaps one day, Otis sighed. Once the council elects a new president, things could change. But as the death of a president is so unlikely, it is also something that the council isn't well prepared for. It may be a year, it may be 10, it may be 100 years. With any luck, the new president will be sympathetic to our plight. And until then, I run from them and keep my distance from you. Otis offered a troubled frown. I'm sorry, Vladimir. It's just the way things are, for now. Vlad sighed. So, I'm on my own. Not entirely. We'll still have letters, and if you're able to reach the distance, we can continue to communicate with our thoughts. Otis grabbed the larger suitcase and headed up the steps to the door. After a moment, Vlad followed. Nellie already had their plates filled with delicious, warm steaks, dripping with blood. Vlad took a swig of B-negative from his glass and listened as Otis relayed details of their trip. Well, not details. Not really. Otis carefully omitted that they'd stayed with other vampires and that Vlad had learned that there are vampires who believe he was some demon-like beast come to reign over vampire kind. Vlad was thankful for that at least. But he didn't speak lovingly of the countryside and of how much he'd enjoyed the trip. Vlad wondered if Otis was trying to reassure him that he cared, but there was no need. He knew his uncle cared for him. How can you go through hours on a dog sled through Siberia just to seek out protection and tutoring for somebody and not care for them? After dinner and after whispered two close goodbyes with Nellie, Otis slipped his top hat onto his head and walked with her to the car. Minutes later, Nellie drove in the direction of the hospital for yet another double shift, and Vlad moved down the steps toward Otis. When will I see you again? In all honesty, I do not know, but I hope it's soon. Otis hugged him and slid into the driver's seat. He looked up at Vlad with a wrinkled brow. If you have any troubles, call for me with your mind. If I don't respond, write me, and should you encounter the Slayer, my best advice is to block the stake. They favor those, and run as fast as you can. Vlad sighed. That's your best advice. Otis chuckled. Sadly, yes. The Lucius has no effect on humans. You'll do fine. Just lay low. He may leave without discovering you. Most Slayers are poorly paid and easily distracted. Bumbling fools, the lot of them. He pulled the car door shut and, after 2 attempts to start it, backed onto the road and drove off down the street. Vlad stayed where he was and watched the taillights of Otis's car shrink in the distance. He missed his uncle already. It was still late afternoon and the sun had not yet set. Across the street, Mr. Templeton was shoveling snow from the sidewalk and tossing it onto his snow-blanketed yard. Several elementary school kids were building a snow fort 2 houses down and filling the air with blissful laughter. Mr. Jenkins, the mailman, walked by and offered Vlad a nod as he shoved a small pile of letters into the mailbox. Vlad watched them all with a distant curiosity. As he turned his head back to the direction Otis had driven, he noticed a man standing across the street, staring directly at him. At first, Vlad merely raised his eyebrows. He wasn't a teacher, Vlad was almost certain, and he knew pretty much everyone in Bathory, if only by face. He watched the man watching him and tilted his head to the side, wondering where he'd seen this man before. The man stepped forward and halfway across the street, he broke into a run. And then it hit Vlad. It was the man who'd been standing across the street that night after Vlad had left the Belfry. The Belfry. The Belfry. The one Vlad felt certain was the Slayer. Everything but the man and Vlad slowed to a crawl. He blinked as the Slayer approached, and Vlad threw his arms up to block the stake, but he was sure the Slayer had behind his back. He backed away as fast as he could. The laughter of the kids down the street sounded like a slow, muffled recording, and Mr. Templeton was shoveling a tenth of the speed he'd been. his lips and forced open his eye again. This time the other eye opened too. Henry. Henry nodded, a dark cloud of concern hanging over him. I had this weird feeling you were, like, in trouble, so I came over and found you lying face down in your driveway, surrounded by a bunch of your neighbors. Mr. Templeton said he was going to call 911, but I stopped him. How'd you manage that? He's got to be the most stubborn old man on the planet. I told him that you'd been sick with the flu and that I was supposed to be looking in on you while Nellie was at work. I said I'd call her as soon as I got you inside. Flap bit his bottom lip and gave Henry a pensive glance. Did you call her? Henry shook his head. No, I wanted to talk to you first. What happened? Vlad tried once more to lift his head but failed. He took a deep breath. His skin felt like it was on fire. What had happened? His memory was fuzzy at first, but then he remembered fangs and a flash of pain. Jessica Bin, his attacker's name. Vlad reached up to his neck. The puncture wounds had already healed, leaving only smooth skin behind. In a disbelieving voice, Vlad said, "A vampire bit me." Henry rolled his eyes. Funny. I'm serious. Henry looked him over for a moment and then nodded. Any idea who it was? He said his name was Jusik. I've never seen him before. Vlad thought for a moment and then met Henry's eyes. What did it feel like when I drank from you? Henry thought for a moment and then said, like a paper cut, to be honest. Your fangs were really sharp, so the bite made me wince, but after that it was okay. It was a little dizzying once you started drinking, but not painful or anything. Why? Vlad rubbed his neck where Jessica had bitten him. When Otis gave me my mark last year, it barely hurt. I felt a little dizzy, but that was it. I wonder why when Jessica bit me, it hurt so much and left me feeling so weak. Well, you just tasted my blood, and Otis was just taking some of yours. Maybe this Jessica guy took more. Henry's voice shook some. Maybe he was trying to kill you. No. He said he was a thief, not a killer. Vlad lifted his head and tried to sit up, but he was overcome by the most nauseating dizziness, so he lay back down. Can you sit up? Apparently, Henry had amazing powers of intuition. No. Vlad gestured to the door with his eyes. I need blood. With an assenting nod, Henry moved out Vlad's bedroom door. Vlad heard him cross the library and move down the stairs. The house was quiet for a moment, and then Henry jogged his way back up the stairs and into Vlad's room. He laid an armful of blood bags on the bed. There were 4 in the freezer. I brought them all. Vlad brought one bag to his mouth and bit into it. It was only then that he realized his fangs had elongated. He sucked the bag dry and reached for another, continuing until they were all empty. But something was missing. He should feel better, but didn't. Vlad squeezed his eyes and then opened them again. I feel weird. Well, you are weird. My heart is racing, and I can't pick up my head without getting dizzy. Vlad licked his lips, relieved that it had been Henry who'd found him passed out in the driveway. He met Henry's eyes. I'm pretty sure I need more blood. Man, how much did he drink anyway? Henry slipped his cell phone out of his pocket. I'm calling Nellie. No. Vlad made a feeble grab for the phone, as if that could stop Henry from calling. He cast Henry a worried glance. You can't call her. She'll worry. Henry sighed and sat the phone on the bed. Vlad, another vampire just tried to have you for dinner. We have to tell someone, and I'm pretty sure the Red Cross doesn't handle these types of situations. Vlad licked the holes in the lad's blood bag clean and lied. I'll be fine. He didn't know if he'd be fine or not. The whole experience made him feel extra guilty for having ever bitten Henry, Ficus barely looked at him. I don't think of you that way, you know. Like my slave. You're my best friend. Henry smiled. I know. Now shut up and drink my blood before I change my mind. Jeez, there's nothing worse than a sappy overlord. Overlord. Vlad pursed his lips. No, Henry. Vlad, I've wanted to tell you something since the 3rd grade. Henry smirked and moved his arm closer. Bite me. Vlad looked at Henry's vein again and shivered. It looked warm, inviting, and delectable. He flipped open Henry's cell phone and punched in the number to the hospital. Hey, Aunt Nellie, could you come home real quick and bring me some blood? We're out. Henry slowly unrolled his sleeve and whispered, What are you going to tell her about the other vampire? Vlad covered the mouthpiece. Nothing, and neither are you. Relief left Henry's eyes, replaced by bemusement. Yes, master. Chapter 17. Trapped. Vlad's stomach was rumbling again, and it was taking every ounce of focus he had to keep his fangs in check. Clearly, lunch hadn't been enough, and his bloodthirst was getting the better of him. Maybe he needed to start sneaking extra snacks in during the day, or maybe get a note from Nellie saying he had to stop at the house for his medication for about 10 minutes every afternoon. Either way, something had to be done to curb his appetite, and it had to be done fairly quickly. His eyebrows scrunched together in irritation as Stephanie Braun, cheerleader extraordinaire and kisser of all boys with a pulse, sashayed over to his locker. Hi, Vlad. He didn't reply. He'd known Stephanie far too long to trust her motives, but instead he tucked his head inside his locker and pretended to be busy looking for something. He didn't know what, but he was sure that he wouldn't find whatever it was until Stephanie had seen something shiny and followed it down the hall. Unfortunately, there must have been a distinct lack of shiny objects in the hall that day, because Stephanie wasn't going anywhere. Did you see the senior lockers? They're painting them black and red. Can you imagine? But then, I suppose it says something for school pride to use our colors. Vlad sighed and pulled his head out of his locker, far enough to raise an eyebrow at her. Are we supposed to be friends or something? Because I missed that memo. Stephanie's eyes grew wide in that fake way they always did when she was trying to impress a new teacher. I'm just trying to reach out. Vlad rolled his eyes. Well, don't, okay? My life is complex enough without you trying to befriend me with some lame freshman outreach program. Don't you mean dork outreach program? She smirked and moved her eyes to something behind Vlad, but it was too late for him to turn. In a moment, Tom had Vlad pinned against his locker while Bill wailed away on Vlad's back with his fists. Vlad cried out in surprise and wondered for a second if Jaws would save him this time, but then Tom picked him up by his shoulders and carried him down the hall, stooping only to toss him through a small door and down several steps. With laughter and taunts of, have fun, ladies, Bill and Tom shut the door as Vlad landed on the bottom step of the boiler room. The moment Vlad stopped rolling, he groaned, clutched his side, and slowly got to his feet. His back throbbed where Bill had pounded it, but his side hurt more, likely from his tumble down the stairs. He made his way back up to the door when a small voice called from below. Don't bother. They'll block it from the outside, just like they did before. Vlad tried the door, but he wouldn't budge. Running the tip of his tongue over his canines, he turned and made his way down the stairs. Eddie Poe was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, adjusting the cracked lens of his camera. Vlad wondered if it had broken during Eddie's tumble down the stairs. So how long have you been down here, Eddie? Eddie shrugged, not meeting Vlad's eyes. Since this morning. Vlad glanced up at the door. He really didn't want to spend his day trapped in a glorified, hot-ass Hades basement, least of all with a boy who was on the verge of learning his deepest, darkest secret. His stomach rumbled as if reminding him about disappointment with a blood bag. Have you tried banging on the door, getting someone's attention? At the sound of Vlad's voice, Eddie flinched. A shard of glass fell from his camera lens to the floor, eliciting a groan. Tried that. It's pretty soundproof, you know, to keep out the noise of the boiler and stuff. Vlad looked around the room. There was nothing in it that would prove even mildly helpful for their escape. The best they could hope for was that Mr. Brennan, the school janitor, check some gauges or something and would unwittingly come to their rescue. With a sigh, Vlad sat on the bottom step and ran a frustrated hand through his hair, brushing it out of his eyes for a moment. Eddie met Vlad's eyes once and then dropped his attention to the floor. He didn't look happy to be sharing the space with a monster. Vlad forced a smile. He wasn't exactly pleased with the arrangement himself, but if he played his cards right, maybe he could have Eddie convinced he was nothing but human by the time the door opened. So, that was some article you wrote. I didn't know you were a writer. Eddie was quiet for a long time, and just as Vlad was about to ask him if he'd been kicked off the school paper, Eddie stood up and stretched. When he was finished, he cast a nervous glance up at the door, and then returned his gaze to the floor. When he spoke, it was so low that Vlad had to strain in order to discern words from the whisper of Eddie's breath. I always knew you were different, but I thought you were just an outcast, like me. Vlad's lungs locked for a moment, refusing to allow air either in or out. There was no question Eddie's slumped posture or an ounce of doubt in his words. He knew Vlad's secret. The air returned to Vlad's lungs in a gulp. He couldn't speak. What do you say to someone who's not just guessing, but has witnessed your deepest secret in action? Vlad looked back over his shoulder at the door and sighed, wondering how long they'd already been down here. He imagined it was nearing the final bell, but without a watch, it was difficult to tell. His stomach rumbled loudly, demanding to be satisfied, and Vlad groaned. Great, just what he needed. Trapped in a room with a human when he was thirsting for blood. To Vlad's immense surprise, Eddie met his eyes. I still don't know what you are exactly, but I read a lot of comic books, so I know I can figure it out. He straightened his shoulders, a thread of confidence creeping into his words. Your eyes flashing purple were the first solid clue that you weren't human, and then when I followed you to the school and you floated up to the belfry, well, I kind of freaked out at first, but I was smart. My mom says I'm not, but I am. I waited and took that picture of you coming down. I could have named you in the article, but right now I just wanted to find out what you are. I thought maybe you'd tell me after you saw the article. Vlad shook his head. There's nothing to tell, Eddie. I don't know who or what you saw. But I'm as human as anybody in this town. When he looked once more at Eddie, he made sure his words were crisp and forceful. You should be more careful, dude. Stuff like that could get you kicked off the paper. Or worse. Vlad held his gaze, making certain the threat was understood. He was tempted to try mind control, but he knew he didn't need to go that far with Eddie Poe. The guy always backed out when confronted. Always. As suspected, Eddie's eyes widened in fear. Eddie took a step back, and when he bumped into the wall, he slid down to a sitting position on the floor, his arms clutching his knees to his chest. He watched Vlad for the next several minutes, as if frightened that Vlad might pounce on him and drink his blood. Ready to oblige, Vlad's fangs slid easily out of his gums. It took several deep breaths, but after a moment, he regained control of his hunger. One thing was for sure, though. If he didn't get out of here soon, Eddie was going to be his next meal. With a deep breath, Vlad focused on Henry. He had no idea if he was capable of reaching his drudge from anywhere other than the training room in Siberia, but he had to try. Henry, I'm trapped in the boiler room approached the steps slowly, his eyes still locked distrustfully, fearfully on Vlad. But then he paused and looked longingly up the stairs. Vlad stepped back, giving Eddie free passage. He kept his jaw tight and his gaze slightly chilled in warning. Eddie glanced down at his shoes, and when he returned his eyes to Vlad's gaze, he seemed to be surer of himself than ever. He spoke in a loud whisper, so that Meredith wouldn't hear. It's worth another detention, Vlad. It's worth 1,000 detentions to find out what you are. He scrambled up the steps, then paused and threw Vlad a determined glance over his shoulder. And worse. He shrank by Meredith without meeting her eyes. Meredith smiled at him. Hi, Eddie. You okay? But Eddie didn't answer. Vlad moved up a few steps, shaking his anger with Eddie from his nerves. In his mind, he was reliving the kiss Meredith had given him outside in the snow and the blowing cold. He wondered, briefly, if she might do it again, if they lingered down here for a while. Thanks for opening the door. We were kind of stuck. A small flash of anger crossed Meredith's eyes, surprising him. I heard Bill and Tom bragging about locking you guys down here, so I came to see if you were still here. What jerks. Vlad smiled. She was so cute when she was mad. The way her nose scrunched up. Meredith looked at him. What are you smiling about? Vlad glanced away. Nothing. I'm just glad to see you. She brightened and Vlad widened his eyes. I mean, the door. I'm glad you opened the door. Oh, a small smile played on her lips. Well, you're welcome. Though Vlad's cheeks were blushing fiercely, he managed to smile. Yeah. My hero. The air suddenly seemed very thin. Meredith was standing just one step above him and looking at him like he was the only boy in the entire world. Vlad wanted very much to be brave enough to kiss her pretty lips. He wanted to, but he wasn't.